So in our basic model of communication between two people, we have our sender who encodes their message through a channel which is then decoded by the receiver. This is the path that the message takes from the sender to the receiver. Importantly, we're then looking for the receiver to provide some feedback to the sender. What's worth understanding is that you actually have in about here filters or barriers, whatever you prefer to call them. So to look at this in more detail, when a sender gives a message to a receiver, they need to choose how to encode it. And that encoding can be the way that they speak, so their tone, it can be in their body language, it can be in their choice of words. It can also be in gestures or signals. Basically, the encoding is how you how you encapsulate your message. So the sender is encoding a message that goes through a channel, and that channel could be through the phone, it could be in face-to-face communication, it may be via email. Of course, the receiver then needs to decode the encoded message that's come via this channel to understand. The only way you'll really know if the receiver has understood the message is if they then provide feedback to the sender confirming what they believe they have heard. The thing that makes this more challenging is the filters and barriers that we put between each other. And when we're talking about these, we're talking about both physical barriers and psychological. What do we mean by physical and psychological barriers? Physical barriers could be a bad phone line, could be poor internet reception. It could also be external noise. Psychological barriers, they're harder to get through. These are the sort of inbuilt prejudices that we hold. So you're talking about things like our likes, our dislikes, our belief systems. These are the things that can subtly work to make sure that even though a sender may be transmitting their message clearly, the receiver doesn't hear them in the same way. When you look at this model of how communication works, it helps you to understand why communication is not always as simple as it seems. It also helps to explain how, unfortunately, we often end up with a situation where we feel we've clearly communicated something, but somehow the receiver ends up with a different impression. For instance, not only do you need to have someone that can clearly communicate, you need to have someone that can concentrate and listen effectively. As a project manager, one of the skills you need to develop is active listening. In active listening, you actually concentrate on what's being said to you, and then by simply paraphrasing what's been told to you back to the sender, that person can then recognise whether you've truly understood their message. When we take this all into consideration, you can understand why you need to have more than one communication method used in a project. As much as we all hate paperwork, At the end of the day, it's the clearest way to document things so that people can return and review what has been said and what information it contains. The other thing is, if you don't understand, for goodness sake, ask. Find out exactly what is being communicated to you, because it's misunderstandings that trip us up time and time again in communication throughout a project. There's actually only one planning process for communication management, and it's called Plan Communications. If you have a look at the diagram, you'll see listed the inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs that are recommended. The major output is the Communication Management Plan, and its purpose is to outline for the life of the project how communication will be managed. Now, if you have a look at the tools and techniques, you'll see listed there communication methods. What are they referring to there? Well, typically in a project, there are 3 methods of communication, and they are interactive, push, and pull. Interactive method is where you have multi-directional communication. So when you're holding a meeting, even if it's by video conference. Push, that's where the project manager pushes information to the stakeholders. A good example, that weekly status report that gets emailed out to push information to the stakeholders. The last was pull. What is pull method? Well, that's where the stakeholder is left to retrieve or pull the information that they require. A good example would be an intranet site that's been set up in an organisation to contain all of the documentation for the project. That then means at any time, any stakeholder can go and pull information from the intranet site to meet their communication requirements. With the readings this week, there's a really good one by Ginger Levins on requirements for effective communication, and I'd like to suggest a forum post too. I'm sure most of you have horror stories from miscommunications. Perhaps you'd like to share some of those, together with examples of how you've worked around miscommunications and improved your communication methodologies.